Yes, people, welcome back to GNA TV and Chelsea Fan TV. I hope you guys are having an amazing day. Ben Jacobs is back with us again. Lots to discuss. We'll be talking about the board and the appointments of certain individuals at Chelsea. We're also going to be talking about Christopher Nkunku a bit later on in the show as well. But I need you guys to do us a big favour. Make sure that you're smashing the like buttons. Please do that. Share in your socials as well. Let everyone know that we are currently live as we speak. And before we get into it and speak to Ben, let's cue the intro. Yes, people, welcome back to GNA TV and Chelsea Fan TV. I hope you guys are having a pleasant day. And as you can see to the right of me or left of me, I have I have Ben Jacobs back on the show. Ben, how are we doing, mate?
Really good. Really excited for this build up to the World Cup and intrigued as well to see how Chelsea are developing as they make moves behind the scenes in the market to bolster their board and their recruitment team. It's going to be a really intriguing and I think ambitious few months ahead.
100%. And there's a lot to talk about in regards to Chelsea. Obviously, more not off on the pitch, but more sort of off the pitch at the moment in terms of what they're doing behind the scenes and, you know, the project that they're trying to build, the philosophy that they're going to try and put moving forward. And it's kind of, as a Chelsea fan at the moment, trying to understand, based on the individuals that they're obviously appointing, where they're trying to go with this. And obviously the first guy that I wanted to obviously get into and speak to you on and get your thoughts on as well, I want to start off with Joe Shields. Obviously he's now been appointed by Chelsea, and on Chelsea Twitter it's come out as the co-director of recruitment and talent for Chelsea. We know that he came from Southampton. He was the head of senior recruitment over there as well. Also he had, I think, 9 years at Man City where he was a part of the academy scouting management there as well. So, you know, we'll get into it when we go through. We'll get into the riff of like the connection that has in terms of the people that are actually joining us as well. But I just want to really get your thoughts on that appointment of Chelsea of Joe Shields.
Well, the first thing to say is that Joe Shields is very highly rated, but the second thing to add and stress is that the vast majority of his experience has not been at senior recruitment level. So the move to Southampton was an interesting one in July because he left Manchester City, where his final role was of the head of the academy recruitment and talent management team, to step into more senior orientated decisions at executive level. And he had far more control over the decision making at Southampton than at Manchester City, where, to be perfectly honest with you, even though Manchester City's growth has been very impressive as a group, there's a lot of cooks. And Chelsea are going to have to be conscious of that in their own dynamic as well. And the more ambitious you are and the bigger club you become, and obviously if you move into a multi-club model format as well, this will be even more so the case, the more appointments you have to make and the more grey area there is over titles and roles and responsibilities. So the dynamic is arguably more important than the titles. And I think that Joe will have learned a lot in a short spell at Southampton, stepping up to senior recruitment. And now he's the co-director of recruitment and talent. And that role is going to be very diverse. It's going to still be quite, as I understand it, youth orientated, but he's going to have the ability within both Chelsea and as it develops the wider group to not only scout talent, which is one of his biggest skills, but also work out the pathway to bring them through Chelsea. And here's where the senior thing comes in, to also be a part of the strategy along with the technical director and the board as to how to get talent that isn't part of that group. So there's two kind of main aims, if you think about it. One is in scouting and allocating talent as part of a team, and then determining how they develop within the Chelsea network, whether that's a formal network or an informal network. And the other task is, how do you enter the race for young talent, either slightly more known or older and thus established already, and get them when there is a race on. And I think that Joe's skills from not just Manchester City, but also his time as assistant head of youth recruitment at Crystal Palace and an academy scout too at Fulham, is in the actual spotting of the talent, with Sancho being one of his most heralded names, if you like, and Lavia too at Southampton, another one, although Ralph Hasenhüttl was a little bit bitter and dismissive of his involvement in that one. But I think most you speak to feel like Joe Shields was indeed a big part of that particular player to Southampton too. So his role is going to entail the initial scouting of talent. That's not to say that information and names won't be fed up to him, but he will then be bringing those names to the wider team for discussion and debate. And then that strategic aspect of pathways and development of talent within the group. And then the longer term window planning around names that are perhaps breaking onto the scene that you want to wait a bit more time to see and assess, or maybe they're not available at this point. And in addition to that, there'll be one or two others that perhaps fall more into like the Jude Bellingham category, and that's where other people in the team would come in. But Joe would still be a part of that, at looking at the data, at looking at the development, because the legwork in his role is not only front-facing with a player. If we're talking about that final aspect like Bellingham, it's also internally about creating dossiers. So using data to basically look at all the different metrics. So then when others in the team go to, only in this final specific category, a Bellingham-like player, they're able to have marginal gains almost to determine which direction to move. And by marginal gains, I mean, can they use data to look at projection of talent and correlate that with the value that's being asked and see whether it's a decent bit of business? Can they use data, and these are other members of the team as well, to project on health and fitness and longevity? Can they use data to look at things like personality traits to see whether or not the player can get a basic valuation away from the football field to see the worth to the brand, both individually and from a club perspective? And all of these things are, once again, above just Joe and his role, but he will be a factor in this because he will be digesting some of the data and putting top line conclusions on it for the wider team. So there's kind of an interesting aspect to his role, because he's getting a bit of the senior recruitment that he had at Southampton, but not to the same degree. And at the same time, part of his role is going back to his roots, which is working with younger players with a view to the first team, but still ultimately a younger demographic of players, which is basically his entire skill set if you take Southampton off his CV. So he wasn't just head of academy recruitment and talent management at Manchester City. He was a UK-based academy scouting manager. And he, at Palace, as I've said before, was also part of the youth recruitment setup too, before in his more formative days, he was just a straight scout at Fulham. So what you see in that career development is just somebody with a really good eye for talent. And I think it would be a good appointment. The only thing that Chelsea have to be a little bit wary of, not just Joe, but also, from what I understand, Todd Bowley as well, is that if you look at Manchester City's use of agents and agent fees, and then if you look at Southampton's, as we'll see on the books over probably the coming year, if you look at in the last 4 months since Joe's been there, the amount of agents used and fees paid to agents, it's a big spike at Southampton, which tells you that Joe's brought in a lot of agents and paid through the club a number of fees, and Manchester City have been guilty of that as well, and Chelsea want to move away from that. So that's the only thing they need to be careful of with all this input, with all these names, with all of this new dynamic. If you need things in the short term, then sometimes the agent is your bridge, because without the model and without the structure, you often need an agent to come in quickly and help you out to get a deal done, and therefore you need to use a higher volume. And if you're looking at a whole different type of player, particularly young players, they can have multiple representation. Caicedo is a good example of that. So then when you choose to sign someone, you might have to pay multiple fees to not only multiple agents, but multiple clubs. And that can rack up in terms of the costs. So Chelsea just need to keep an eye on that. It's not a criticism of Joe specifically, but it's just a note that Man City did it, and then suddenly Southampton did it. So quite clearly, that is the way that he's used to operating in, and Chelsea just need to make sure that their model is prudent and sustainable and not overly agent-driven. But it's a good appointment.
Yeah, 100%. And again, I think that the time will tell with him as well. And I also think it's like, you know, pieces on a chessboard. It's like we're kind of like putting the pieces on the chessboard specifically on where and how we want them to operate, work together, and whatever else. And we're going to talk about some of the potential other appointments. I know some people in the chat also mentioning about technical directors asking questions about the January window. We are going to talk about all of that today, guys. So please stay patient. There's over 200 of you guys here at the moment. Please smash the likes. But I have noticed one thing, and everyone keeps saying the same thing in the comments at the moment, Ben. Great top. They're loving that jumper that we've got on, mate, at the moment.
Nearly Christmas. I think I can get away with it.
We're going to talk about Mark Edwards soon. I see a lot of people asking about Mark Edwards. We are going to get into, like I said, the technical director a bit later. I want to move on to one of your tweets, actually, and it's not an appointment as of yet, but it seems like Chelsea are under negotiations with this certain individual. And the individual we're going to want to move on to real quickly is Paul Winstanley. Obviously, from what I understand from him, and I don't know much about him, but obviously I understand he's probably the head of recruitment at Brighton. I did read one of your tweets, Ben, and you said obviously at the time that you know there was positive talks on going with Brighton, and that you know, he'll become sort of a senior recruitment figure if he's obviously appointed at Chelsea. Is there any more news on the Paul Winstanley standpoint? And again, what do you expect from him coming to Chelsea?
Yeah, he's going to be a very senior figure and part of this kind of think tank of at least 4 or 5, and it may well grow, that ultimately make their decisions by numbers. And in that respect, it's like a transfer committee that Liverpool founded pretty much a decade ago. So Chelsea are kind of taking the structure of how they make their decisions from Liverpool. They're taking the multi-club model to some extent from Manchester City and a fair amount of staff that have worked at the City Football Group. And then they're taking their onus on data and youth from Red Bull. So when you put it like that, they're kind of picking and choosing all the best things they like from 3 very different models and trying to put them all together, which sounds like a smart and clear plan. But obviously, because they're moving so fast, they first need the clubs, they need the senior figures, and they need the dynamic.
Yeah.
And one thing I'd say, which is really important and underrated, and I know that Todd Boehly spoke to FSG at Liverpool before the sale was even complete to get a sense of the dynamic, because they are very different owners to, say, the Glazers at Manchester United, the City Group, or, of course, Abramovich at Chelsea. And in those conversations, it was kind of emphasized to Todd Boehly that the people culture, particularly if we're talking about your recruitment team, is absolutely vital. So it's not only about finding the best, but it's also about finding the best people that work together. And that, to some, might sound kind of corny or generic or whatever. Some might even say very American in terms of building a culture, loving the place you work. But that's not what I mean. And that's not what Boehly's trying to do. Of course, every company wants that. So there's a whole different conversation about how urgently Chelsea need to address that aspect. And they will have a HR team along with Boehly to do that and make Chelsea the best possible place to work and the most inclusive. But what I'm talking about is specifically around recruitment. And it's emphasized to Boehly from FSG that if you're going to have a transfer committee, it's not just about the best. It's not just about the ambition. It's not just about the structure, and it's not just about the scouting. But one of the most important things, and totally underreported, is the ability to challenge, the ability to debate, the ability to even fall out. And it's all about having a forum where you can and will disagree. So these names are not brought in only to work collaboratively in order to allocate a target. They're there to disagree. They're there to, professionally speaking, fall out. And then eventually you come to a decision by numbers. And in order to do that, you kind of have to have a core of 4 or 5, of which, if he joins, Winstanley will be one of them, Vivell as well as technical director. And we've obviously already mentioned Joe Shields as well. And Lawrence Stewart has been confirmed too. They will work together, but they'll also have their own remits where they're fed up things. And what Liverpool do really well is they will have scouts that are only scouts. They'll have other scouts that are scouts, but also have a science background. They'll have analysts that have a football background, but they'll also have analysts that simply don't know football. And Liverpool don't want them to know football. They only want them to look at numbers. Because then what you get is a series of different approaches at a lower level in your model that get fed up. And eventually, in a dossier, they get put in front of this so-called think tank. And effectively, they come with their recommendations and they debate it. It's very almost political in that respect. And then finally, there'll be an extra layer above that 4 or 5 of the really senior people, like a sporting director, that will make the final determination on approach. And of course, at that point, the manager and Carl Macaulay are all involved in the conversation as well. So it's interesting because this is Bowley's approach to have an open forum where people may agree, and they'll certainly agree on the structure, but they may disagree. And the disagreement is equally as important and healthy. Because if you have a kind of non-challenged mentality, which to be honest with you was the case with Marina and Buck, they were excellent in many respects in what they did, but they backed themselves. And there was no real challenge ever against Buck. There was no real challenge ever against Marina. Now it's the complete opposite. And I think a lot of people joining Chelsea tell me the same thing, that they relish that freedom to challenge, which is why the dynamic is going to be so important. So then coming back to Winstanley, he is very keen on the role and will join as long as the clubs agree a package. So I don't think there's any danger here of having a Freund-like situation of a U-turn, as long as the clubs can agree a deal. And from what I understand, the talks are very positive. He will be the next one through the door, along with Vivell as well. And it's sort of an interesting appointment because in Winstanley's case, he would be, in essence, promoted to a director of football style role. And I would urge people listening not to get too caught up by the titles here, because the final titles could all seem quite confusing, because there could be more than one technical director, one for Chelsea, one for the group. There's a co-director of recruitment and talent, which means that there may well, in fact, there will, in all likelihood, be another co-director of recruitment and talent, either promoted internally or somebody else coming through the door. And then you look at a director of football, even if that is not the title given to him, and you think, well, how does that differ from a sporting director? And then is there going to be a CEO of football? And eventually you'll confuse yourself by the titles. So at this point, don't worry about the titles, because it's very American to have a range of titles that don't necessarily, in the hierarchy from the outside in, appear that clear. Because much like Glick is the president of business operations, if they then appoint a CEO, which, as I understand it, is still very possible, who's more senior? And what's the difference between the president of business operations and a CEO? And similarly, what's the difference between a co-director of recruitment and talent and just a director of recruitment or a head of recruitment? And what's the difference between a director of football, a sporting director, and a CEO of football if they were to have all three? So the titles don't mean that much, but in essence, Winstanley wants to join, and now it's up to Chelsea and Brighton to finalise. And Chelsea have got a really good relationship with Brighton. There's no real bad blood just because they're raiding Brighton once again. Paul Barber doesn't see it that way. And by the way, and this is only my personal opinion, if Chelsea were to go down the line of a CEO and they were not to appoint internally, and if they appointed internally, they could turn to someone like Jonathan Goldstein, who's already the CEO of Kane International Group. But if they don't go down that line, if they do bring in a CEO, because they might just go with Glick for now, then someone like Paul Barber might be somebody that they go for as well, who's got a great relationship with Todd Bowley. So it might not be the last time that they raid Brighton. And Paul's a great guy and is somebody I think that could have good value for Chelsea. So that's only my personal opinion. I'm not saying that they're going down those lines, but what I am saying is that with Winstanley, the relationship with Brighton is there, and therefore, as long as they can agree a package, there should be no reason why Winstanley doesn't join, because he's very keen and excited by the role, and he would be promoted to somebody that takes care of the day-to-day that a director of football normally would look after. So he would be working with senior management more for now, from what I gather, around Chelsea than necessarily the group aspect, and more short-term and imminently planning for January if he comes in soon enough, or certainly next summer. And again, looking to give a bit of structure to the day-to-day of some of the other people that we've already mentioned. So I think that Chelsea really like him, but most importantly, you've got Kyle McCauley and Graham Potter who are really recommending him. So this feels like a appointment that bridges together new manager, his recruitment specialist. They've worked with him before, so they almost also become their own three. And that's very useful, I think, because when you have this much upheaval and change, it's very important that not only do you have a connection between the executive staff as the model builds, but you also have a clear connection heading into Graham Potter's first window on the shorter term decision making. And that's where Winstanley will be very beneficial, because he's already got that workflow and that pre-existing relationship with both Kyle McCauley and Graham Potter.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that makes a lot of sense, to be honest, as to why they would do that as well. And I also, even though it makes it look like Chelsea are maybe rushing, but there's a model or an idea that Bowley and Egbali probably have in terms of where they want to go. There's obviously Graham Potter's aware of it as well. But like you said, I don't think it's something that they're going to continuously rush to do. Obviously, it looks like they are at the moment, but who's to say that, like you said, that they may add a CEO a bit later on, and etc. etc. These are things that I think is a work in progress. They probably have an idea of where they want to go and what they want to sustain for the future. But, you know, these things may all need a bit of time in itself. But it's also I think, about picking the right profiles, like you were saying, that the specific profiles, the connections between, like we said, Whitley and Potter, etc. So I think it's going to be interesting to see at a later stage, really, where the route that we choose to go. And just don't be surprised, I don't think, if we see more at a later stage, even when we think maybe we're finished here, that Chelsea continue and Bowley continue to try and to enhance or make it better in the long term in the long term process. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see what happens. There's over 340 of you guys here. Big up to every single one of you that are currently still in here at the moment. Please make sure you're smashing the likes as well. We are going to be talking about the January window very shortly, a little bit later. We've still got the technical director discussion to have as well. One more individual that I want to talk to before we go into the technical director. I want to talk about Lawrence Stewart and his appointment as the technical director to focus on sort of football globally at Chelsea as well. Obviously, he comes from Monaco. There was a good connection between him and Paul Mitchell over there, from what we understand, and the work in there. I know Paul Mitchell hasn't been spoken about much in terms of technical director. I know we're going to get to that a bit later on. Some people feel, well, if he's been appointed, is Paul Mitchell maybe an option maybe for Chelsea, and maybe they're bringing him in because he was his right hand man and stuff like that. But again, same sort of question again on this one, Ben, as the other two. What do you expect from Lawrence himself? And do you think, again, it's a good appointment for Chelsea?
Well, Lawrence is excellent. That's the first thing to say. He's arguably the most exciting of the ones that have been confirmed or are likely to be confirmed. Comes with a big reputation, excellent contact book, and as you say, has worked very closely with Paul Mitchell. Mitchell himself is in a unfortunate position almost, because my sense, talking to sources, is that a technical director role is too low for him, and a sporting director role in this context, in this model, might be a little bit too soon for him. So he's almost caught between positions. But again, Mitchell has got a very strong reputation. His name is often linked and bandied around, and he would be very keen for sure on a sporting director role. So we'll have to wait and see. And the other thing, just to briefly add on the sporting director aspect, is that a sporting director by name may not be a sporting director by nature, which might allow Chelsea to employ somebody more junior and give them that title, because guess what? There's other people around them, and there's also somebody above them. And that is my sense still, as I've said many times, as I reported weeks back, that everything will feed back up to not just Todd Bowley, but also Bed Egbali. And they're enjoying their role in recruitment. And I don't see them giving that up anytime soon. Even if they give it up by title, by nature, I still see themselves as being heavily involved in the recruitment process. and the decision-making process specifically. So therefore, a sporting director that comes in has to buy in to that model. And it may change, of course, because if they get a big name sporting director, if they get other clubs, if they build their model, when they get success and stability, at that point, things may differ. But right now, I think that Chelsea are in no rush on the sporting director, and they're also not sure whether they need a big name, highly experienced sporting director, because it might not actually be the title at the top of their pyramid. They might put a VP or a CEO of recruitment above that. So these are still, I think, discussions. And I don't see, even though Todd and Berdad will become more strategic, bigger picture, model building, I don't see them stepping back at this stage, not in January anyway, from the day-to-day decision-making, because they're very comfortable, regardless of titles, in the role that they're in. And it's useful to them as well, because ultimately they're actually having to meet people, get their hands dirty, and build a contact book in a sport that they're new to. And I've said it many times, how useful is that in the long run to have your owner having fulfilled this role, because ultimately they'll have a much better connection and understanding of how the football department works. Whereas traditionally at football clubs, you can get friction between a distant owner and the football department because they're on different pages. They've got different ideas and each have got a lack of understanding as to what the other does. That will not be the case at Chelsea. So then with Lawrence, he comes in as technical director, and he is very much about the global aspect here. And Chelsea were quick to emphasize that in their statement, which means that it's highly likely that we'll see another technical director, or certainly another role title offered to Vivell that is more club-centric, if you like. And then Lawrence is about the multi-club model, about the growth of the club and about the development of players in the longer term. And that's basically what a technical director does. They window plan. There's, of course, overlap, but they're looking at scouting networks. They're looking multiple windows ahead. They're looking at connecting data. They're looking at connecting pathways. They're looking at both young and existing talent. And they're formulating a strategy that prepares for the long run. So there isn't mad panic. So you're not just looking at it window by window, and all good clubs do this. They plan multiple windows ahead. And I think that Lawrence is the perfect person for this role. He comes with an amazing reputation. He is somebody that is very good, I think, at being collaborative and listening to other opinions, which is underrated in recruitment departments. He's got a good read of data. He's got himself a good eye for talent. And he's got an excellent network as well. And he sort of was in a interesting position at Monaco, I suppose, because the strategy there was more about bringing in the talent and then having that kind of sell-on value, similar, I suppose, to the Red Bull Group, but not with the same connection, which means that what you were bringing through and thus the decisions you were making were, what were right for Monaco, but we're also looking at sell-on value, with Tchouaméni being a great example of that, sold to Real Madrid for 80 million. But at Chelsea, what's going to be a challenge he'll relish is that it's not really about finding a player that will grow in value for sale purposes. It's about finding a young player at value that is going to have a pathway to the Chelsea first team. And of course, if they get sold, you're going to make a lot of money, but the financial gain doesn't come at the end of the line, like with Tchouaméni. When a player's sold, the challenge is in using your network to pre-predict talent that are right for Chelsea and project to get them at a value that is a bargain. So then obviously if they work, you hopefully don't sell them and they become a mainstay in the Chelsea team and you've got an elite level footballer for a steal. But if do need to sell them because the pathways are not there, because you've got value at the beginning of the journey, you still, if they, in inverted commas, fail, can cash in on them and make money and reinvest that money on future signings. So it is a slightly different strategy to at Monaco, but he's the perfect person for the job. And I think he's one of the most exciting hires from the people that either have come in or will come in, because everybody that I speak to about Lawrence Stewart speaks very, very highly of him.
Interesting stuff. Another interesting prospect at Chelsea that's been brought in. I'm really interested to see how they all, like I said, work together, and the roles that Todd Boehly has for them at Chelsea, the ideas, the philosophy, what I think what they've done with their backgrounds probably gives them an idea if again, it suits what we want to do. And I think that is something that maybe the owners of Chelsea are going to expect to see. It's just how well are they all going to sort of work together once, obviously, we get a technical director, maybe a potential sporting director, which is what we're going to come to next, actually. Christopher Vivell has been obviously heavily linked to Chelsea, and supposedly, apparently, was a lot of like the sort of bigger brands, sort of Twitter journos. They're saying basically that it could potentially happen, that it should happen. They don't see why it wouldn't. Then we're being told that Todd Boehly's still looking to be interim in January, that there's not going to be a rush to make this decision, that they want to kind of keep their options open. I feel like they're trying to sort out all the other areas of the puzzle before maybe making the decision on what maybe they want to do with the technical director. I mean, what are your thoughts on Vivell to Chelsea? Do you feel, from what you know, that will happen? And then once you've answered that, we'll then talk about the potentials of Michael Edwards, because I know people were asking about that in the chat as well, and other individuals. But yeah, what's your thoughts on Vivell?
Yeah, I mean, Christopher Vivell obviously left pretty acrimoniously from his previous gig because of the so-called lack of trust, and positive talks have taken place on multiple occasions, and those talks are now entering the home stretch, if you like. And you're absolutely right in what you say, that Chelsea are in no rush and they're making sure that the hires are right rather than quick. But by the same token, January and Boehly's role is not remotely affected by Christopher Vivell coming in or not, because the technical director style role that Vivell is being touted for is not going to impact Todd Boehly, who will basically remain the interim sporting director in January. That's what Chelsea are planning for. And if anything changes, if they find the right candidate, then of course they could appoint somebody by title that takes it off Boehly. But that doesn't mean that he won't promote himself to the CEO of football, or that doesn't mean that he won't still have exactly the same role, but just take the title away. So I think it's fair to say that everything is coming up through Boehly and also Behdad Eghbali, and whether or not they have titles or not in January and in the summer is kind of irrelevant, because they're ultimately the owners of the football club and they want to stay active within the process of recruitment. And if they want to play their owners' cards at any point and have the final say on something, they can, because they own the football club. And I don't think they're the personalities that will do that, not in the short term anyway, because they're still learning. But the point is, they're not going to be Abramovich and distant. They're not going to leave it to a football department without getting their hands dirty. And at the moment, therefore, it is safe to assume, regardless of who comes in and with whatever titles, that Todd Boehly will still be pulling the strings in January, and maybe even further as well, in a very direct way, actually being a part of negotiations and deals. And that's normal as the model builds. And then with Christopher Vivell, it's just a case of finalizing an agreement. Chelsea, by all accounts, are still keen. I should just point out for balance that the club have briefed that they are talking to multiple candidates, and that can be construed as distancing themselves to some extent, but it's normal until anything is agreed. And this is just what clubs do. And any rumors, certainly as a journalist, are always to be taken with a pinch of salt, because you hear different things from different sides. And that usually tells you that talks are just ongoing. And they wouldn't be having multiple talks and advancing those multiple talks unless they thought that they could get this one over the line and there was a clear appetite from Vivell to join them, which there is. So I still expect this one to be completed and in the near future. But what I would say is that none of the other appointments are impacting on this. I think that when people saw Lawrence Stewart come in, they perhaps thought that means that Vivell is somehow off the table. That's not my understanding. My understanding is that whether it's Vivell, which is likely, and as I understand it, close, or whether it's another, somebody in that role in addition to Lawrence will come in. And as Lawrence's announcement clarified, his role is going to be globally orientated. And I think that the other person, if they carry the same title, and that is the if at the moment, will be working a little bit closer to the Chelsea brand rather than the group brand. But this is why it's taking time, because when you build a new model and you've got a lot of people with sort of crossover titles, and you've got no head of the model other than Bowley at this point, not in terms of sporting director, every candidate's asking the same thing. What's my remit? What are my lanes? What's my title? Can I get a promotion on the title that I was previously doing? Who else is coming in? This is what everyone's asking, much like a player will be asking the same thing as well when a window opens. So that's why it can take time. And Chelsea are a lot stronger behind the scenes on the recruitment stage. And from what I gather, they're very confident in January. It's never as busy a window anyway as the summer. So they don't feel like there's a rush to get these names in specifically in time for January. They just feel like there's a rush, having reviewed the business, to get their model up and running. And at the moment, it's looking very, very likely that Vivell will be a part of that model as well.
And it doesn't surprise me when you look at the interest that Bowley has in the Man City model in terms of what Red Bull have done up to this point. Now, you can kind of see with the personnel that have been sort of appointed up to this point, there's a little connection between their past, where they've worked, what they've been doing and stuff like that. So I think it's going to be interesting. We are going to talk January window very shortly because I know people are waiting for it, and I can see people ask me so many questions about certain players, which is typical, isn't it? But I want to really just quickly talk about Michael Edwards, because obviously we know Bowley's not looking like he's going to rush the decision like we just spoke about earlier on. We heard that Man United are interested in him, obviously, and then we were told by one of the bigger United Twitter bases out there that basically he was interested and it would look like it was going to happen and whatever. And then now we're being told, well, actually there is an interest, but Michael Edwards hasn't made a decision on where. I think yourself actually mentioned about Michael Edwards not being 100% sure on what he wants to do and where he wants to operate. We know that he wanted to be given until summer next year anyway, before making a decision on where he goes next. From what you understand up to this point with Michael Edwards, do you feel that when you look at what Chelsea have got going on at the moment, the profile of different recruitments that they brought in and whatever, do you feel that Michael Edwards would fit Chelsea? And do you feel that maybe Todd Bowley may still have the door open for him? Or do you feel that there may be potentials for any others at a later stage?
Well, I think, first of all, Chelsea see Michael Edwards as the perfect fit for them. And that's the most important thing. But they also have to appreciate that whoever Edwards joins, it's going to be on his own terms. And if there's one sporting director or CEO of football or whatever title somebody's given, if there's one person in that role that's worth waiting for, it's Michael Edwards. It's as simple as that. There's nobody else out there in the industry worth waiting a year for other than Michael Edwards. And we know that, in essence, Michael Edwards was at least Chelsea's first choice towards the back end of the window. They held multiple talks with him, and they made him, as I understand it, an outstanding offer. And he was blown away by that offer and the project and Todd Bowley. But the timing wasn't right. So then the ball goes back into Chelsea's court. And are they prepared to wait for Michael Edwards or explore other candidates? And coming back to what we said before about Chelsea not being in a rush, they have both options because they looked at other names and they held a series of talks and interviews. They obviously then moved on to Christoph Freund, who U-turned on a decision to join. And now they're back again. At some point, they will make an appointment, but they don't see that as urgent or imminent at this stage. And I don't think that anybody at the club will be particularly worried or alarmed if they don't have anybody in place for the January window, which is a slight change of position because we were being told over the summer that they really wanted to try and get in a sporting director, if at all possible, by September. And now there's kind of a indefinite timescale on appointing a sporting director or somebody to sit at the top of the pyramid. They may not be given the title of sporting director, but somebody to sit at the very top of the recruitment pyramid. So Edwards is a possibility, but make no mistake, he hasn't made up his mind. So with Manchester United, it was never close. I respect other reports. I respect people with other sources. But as I said first, a couple of days back, it was never close. Nothing was close between Edwards and Manchester United, or nothing is close between Edwards and Manchester United. So, of course, Manchester United rate Michael Edwards. Everybody rates Michael Edwards. But to reiterate, as I reported, nothing is close between Edwards and Manchester United. And Edwards himself is still keeping his options open. So if Chelsea want to come back for Edwards and are prepared to wait, they stand a chance for sure. But again, he has not made up his mind. And if he had made up his mind, then he would have already joined Chelsea, either immediately U-turning on his break, or he would have put something in place to join at the end of his break. So he is still considering. He's keeping his promise of taking a break from football and spending time with his family. And the other thing which may factor into how Chelsea act is he needs persuasion to be in for the summer window of 2023. So everyone's saying, oh yeah, he's not available until the summer. And then no doubt Chelsea fans listening are saying, well, if we can get through January, then why on earth are we not just only focusing on Edwards and getting him for the summer? But that's not the case. Edwards' break is through the summer. So therefore, ideally, he would like to start his first window in January 2024. So it's not a case of, oh, we could have him in May or April. It's a case of he would prefer to see out January window now and the summer window and then start on a project. Now, that's the area that may be flexible. So if Chelsea or another club can persuade him to be in place for next summer, then once January's out the way, he becomes available on the market. But right now, his start date is miles away, and that may be factored into the decision-making as well. And my sense is that at this point, talking to sources, it's also Chelsea that haven't decided. And the reason for that, to be perfectly honest with you, again, comes back to Todd Boehly. Because if Boehly maintains his interim sporting director position in January with a new structure and builds a new model, and it goes well, then why would Todd Boehly step away? Because he's enjoying it. He'll just continue. And then suddenly a person like Michael Edwards of that caliber may not want to come in, because when the offer was pitched to him back in the summer, he was in complete control of building a model. But if everything goes according to plan with Boehly and Berdage and they don't step back, and it is only an if, but I'm putting that possibility out there, then the sporting director or whatever title they give them is going to be way more junior than Michael Edwards, because Michael Edwards wouldn't fit into that structure. So Boehly's kind of having his cake and eating it in many respects, because he thinks he's got enough for January. And if they find the right candidate to come in at a more senior level, fine. But once again, Boehly will still basically be doing what they're doing now, regardless in January. And if it works, then they may just carry on. So effectively, Todd Boehly can say, well, I didn't need someone like a Michael Edwards because through 2 windows, it's working as is. And then they may go for somebody more junior, or they may get through January and then they may say, well, we've kept it ticking. Now somebody like Michael Edwards can come in. And if Chelsea are lucky, they'll persuade him to start a little bit earlier from his original break. So this is Chelsea keeping their options open. One, because they don't want to rush. 2, because Michael Edwards is worth waiting for, and 3, because Todd Boehly genuinely believes that he might be the person that should tie everything together, at least in the short term.
It does make me laugh a little bit, because I know how Chelsea, there's over 500 people here now, so big up to everyone that are here at the moment. But the fact that Todd Boehly could potentially not appoint the likes of someone like Michael Edwards, just purely because he may feel in himself that he can handle the role, may put a bit of a question mark against his name. And I get the whole thing of like the building up of relationships as owners, and I think it's very important to do. I really do. But it's just, it still goes down to the underlying experience, isn't it? And they've not, this is a new sport for them. As and I know they're big in America, in American sport, but this is a completely different ball game. And I can see that they're trying to put individuals in place to do certain aspects, and that 100% makes sense. But not having a sporting director in place and Todd Boehly and Ed Bailey feeling comfortable on. You think? Yeah, but then it's going to be a junior role, like you said, and that's the thing for me. It's like
junior. No sporting director is junior. I think just so this doesn't get sensationalized into a Boehly's going to do everything, or they won't have a sporting director, or they'll only have a junior sporting director. I just want to emphasize for context, more junior than Edwards. Every sporting director is senior by nature. But I think what I want to clarify, so fans don't panic into this notion that Boehly's the owner, Boehly's the chair, Boehly's the president of business, Boehly's the sporting director, Boehly's doing everything, Boehly's the kit manager, Boehly's the assistant manager, whatever, because that's the kind of joke it will turn into. If, and it is an if, everything goes according to plan, it's because the structure is working. And if Boehly's at the top of that structure and was to call himself the CEO of football, or the sporting director, whether interim or other, his role wouldn't be in the doing in the same way that a lot of people construe what Edwards would do. His role would be very senior. So the top of the pyramid in that context, regardless of the title, would be strategic. And beneath him, the club would be functioning in a much more traditional recruitment model. And the manner in which Boehly got his hands dirty would not necessarily be the same as now, if you see what I mean. And I think that's key, that, if Boehly does sit at the top of the pyramid, that doesn't mean he's negotiating with everyone. That doesn't mean he's picking the players. What it means is that he's overseeing, strategically speaking, which even is above, to some extent, what a Michael Edwards might do, which means that he's making sure that everything in the club is functioning, like the data. He's making sure that the recruitment internally is correct. He's trusting, he's delegating, but he's got clear oversight. So what we're not saying, if, and it is just an if, Boehly and Eghbali continue, that they are going to be the ones taking every meeting, every negotiation. They're going to be the ones talking directly to Carl McCauley and Graham Potter. They're still going to be stepping back, but their title will still give them a say and a part of the structure, if you see what I mean. And why shouldn't it? Because they spent over 4 billion on the football club.
100%. I agree. Before we go into this, and we are going to talk January window next, guys, but please make sure we're smashing the likes, as always, and subscribing to the channel. Todd Miller with the donations. Thank you very much. This is Jules Koundé. I should have joined them. I don't know. I think I've seen something on there where they're taking comments and putting it to Jules Koundé's head and apparently making it look like he said it, but I'm being told that they're false comments. So yeah, big up to Todd Miller. Thank you for the donation. Obviously, 16 minutes ago, we just had this come up from CFC Pies on Twitter, and it says that Boehly and Clear Lake and their comments was that we have a clear plan and will adopt a modern and data-driven philosophy focused on elite emerging talent. Then it goes on to say we're assembling a deep and collaborative management team who are eager to build a continued sustained winner at Chelsea. And it goes back to what Ben's been saying pretty much this whole show, is that, they're looking for the long run. They're looking to build something that's going to be able to be sustained in a way that maybe Man City do things, for example, and it's worked up to this point where they're still successful and they keep growing, and it's not even just on the pitch, even though it's important on the pitch, but it's also off the pitch, and it's the understanding of everyone's roles. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see in what route Chelsea move. Maybe we'll learn more on the hierarchy in January, and Vivell and etc. may get appointed. But I do want to move away from that onto the players' side of things now, because I see a lot of people in the chat asking questions about potential January signings and etc. And there's been a couple of names that have popped up, which I'll probably just throw at you, and you can just give me a quick update and say, well, no, it's not going to be a January, it's going to be potential summer, etc. But let's start with Gvardiol from Leipzig, because obviously at the beginning of a couple of months ago, we were being told that there was some sort of agreement between Leipzig and Chelsea for the player. And then now we're being told it's gone a little bit more quiet on that instance, but there is interest from the player and obviously Chelsea themselves to try and get something done. Maybe a deal between the clubs hasn't been reached yet. I don't expect it to happen in January, don't get me wrong, but do you see Gvardiol potentially being an option for Chelsea in the future?
It's still an option. Chelsea tried to fend off their suitors a bit like they've done with Nkunku, and get a pre-agreement in place in order to wrap this up for a year's time. January was not out of the question, but the shift is in an acceptance that if they're going to get Josko Gvardiol, it's going to take time. Whereas I think initially when they were scrambling after lots of different defenders, when Thomas Tuchel had the urgency to really bring in, at that point, they were certainly wondering whether they could get Gvardiol in the short term. Now, I think it's a much longer game. There's no agreement in place. Chelsea did try to line up something that has not materialized despite their best efforts. And at this point, it remains to be seen whether Chelsea can get a deal in place. I think that Josko Gvardiol in January is very unlikely. And I think that the challenge that Chelsea will have is by the time we get to a year's time, there's going to be a whole range of suitors entering the mix for him. Tottenham are looking at him. Gvardiol was also a player, by the way, that Ralf Rangnick recommended to Manchester United, and Erik ten Hag really likes him as well. So he is going to be in high demand, and would be a very good signing for Chelsea. But at the moment, what's also putting Chelsea off is that unlike others that they feel are good value for money because of their age and potential, I think they feel like with Gvardiol, he's being priced slightly out of the market at the moment, which means they would have to pay above the odds. And this is one of the things that, as things settle and Chelsea need less, particularly perhaps in 2 windows' time, you're going to see less of a desire from Chelsea to just spend for the sake of spending. So to be perfectly honest with you, Chukwuemeka, great potential, but most in the industry think 50 million plus 5 was above market value. Cucurella, virtually everyone I've spoken to at other clubs, to some extent you'd expect them to say this because they were unsuccessful, but there's a lot of clubs out there that never even entered the race because as soon as the price got above 35 or 40 million, again, they felt that it was miles above market value. Chelsea have paid a fee that could be as high with add-ons as 62 million. So what they don't want to do, even if the players end up succeeding, is be the club that always pays more. And I think that you'll find with Gvardiol that they'll be a bit tougher, financially speaking, in how they negotiate if they choose to proceed. And the other thing, just point out with Gvardiol, is that this was a very Tuchel-driven target that he wanted done quickly and urgently, if at all possible. Very ambitiously. I think everyone at Chelsea knew that there were very low odds of it happening in the short term, like I say, but Tuchel wanted it done. And then if it wasn't to be done, Tuchel wanted it locked in. Now Graham Potter and Carl McCauley and all these other names coming in may have slightly different ideas, but also game plans as well as to, one, if they're going to move for Gvardiol, but 2, when the time and the value is right in the market. So it's still one to watch, but it's nowhere near as close. One, as it actually was 2 months or so ago, and 2, nowhere near as close as Nkunku.
That is the guy we're going to go to next. A lot of people have been asking questions about Nkunku and obviously the pre-agreement that Fabrizio Romano's came out himself and said is in place, and also there's a deal in principle, I'm assuming, between both Leipzig and Chelsea at this moment in time. Again, it feels a bit like the Gvardiol in the way that it started off, but this one seems to be pulling through a lot more, has more steam behind it. Obviously, they've again kind of jumped the gun. They know that he's going to be available next season. There might be a lot of interest from some top European clubs as well. He's on form, isn't he? He's really playing well at the moment, and Nkunku as well. I watched him against Real Madrid, and he really offers what I feel is a lot to what Chelsea kind of may need from a versatile aspect as well in the way that he plays the game, and also he puts the ball in the back of the net. Ultimately, some things that Chelsea still need to sort out. I mean, what is the update on Nkunku from your side? And again, I don't expect it to be a January thing, but maybe an agreement can be settled and agreed for summer. But yeah, give us an update on Nkunku, basically.
Yeah, Chelsea's strategy with recruitment is seemingly to get people with Chris in their name. They tried for Christoph Freunds. They are close to Christopher Vivell. They were interested in Cristiano Ronaldo, and now Christopher Nkunku is another one that is pretty close. And I think you're absolutely right, by the way, in what you say against Real Madrid. He just showcased everything that was good about his game. He scored a goal. He had, I think, 3 chances created, 3 shots on goal from memory, plenty of touches in the opposition box, a fair few dribbles as well. But as importantly, what you get from Nkunku is duels won and clearances. He works very, very hard for the team, and he's also very safe on the ball. He's got a good passing accuracy percentage for the season as well. So people will naturally look at the goal contributions, whether assists or goals, but don't discount that wider depth and team ethos that he brings, which is why everybody at Chelsea sees him as a phenomenal talent. And even though I said before that with all these new names and with Graham Potter and Kyle McCauley, there may be differences of opinion, and those differences of opinion, remember, are healthy. It's not a case of division. It's a case of the disagreement or debate leads to you making the right decisions collectively. And that is Chelsea's approach. But with Nkunku, everyone's on the same page. So the so-called secret medical somewhere near Frankfurt was done despite some denials. And there were Chelsea medical professionals present. So make no mistake, that was not some random medical or trip for insurance purposes. That was a Chelsea medical. It's perfectly normal for it to be denied, especially mid-season. And the agreement's very close. So Chelsea's tactic is to blow away their suitors by lining something up. And in lining something up, instead of paying the release clause, they pay a bit higher than the release clause. And this actually benefits Chelsea in many ways, at least as far as their books are concerned, because they don't have to meet the release clause terms. So when you pay a release clause, it's not just activating it, it's paying it based on the specified terms, including the structure. Whereas if you agree a higher deal, then you can obviously pay it on your own terms. And when Nkunku renewed his deal with Leipzig, it was done very fairly. The release clause was set below market value. So that way there would be no problem with Nkunku knowing that he could leave, because the fee is a bargain fee. But that could potentially create a whole variety of suitors circling. So then at that point, Leipzig can go to a club like Chelsea and say, well, you know what, we can lock something in with you now if the player wants to join you, but you got to pay higher. And that's win for the club, and it's win for Chelsea, and it's win for Nkunku. And when a player signs a new deal like this with a relatively low release clause, probably 10 million below his market value, if not slightly more, it's good for the player too, because it doesn't lock him in due to the release clause. But players like signing these deals, and Leao might do the same, by the way, at Milan, because in that short period that they stay at the club, they're on improved terms. And the club can afford those improved terms because deep down they know they're only going to be staying for a season. And then when you then negotiate with Chelsea, your terms are even higher. So Chelsea have to match those terms or improve those terms. So the player effectively, in Nkunku's case, gets a pay rise now and a pay rise in a year's time. and it's a great deal for the player and the agent as well. So sometimes a renewal of a deal can actually be with a view to a departure in a window or two, and this is the case with Nkunku. So we don't know exactly when Chelsea are going to announce it. And I was always told, but this was weeks back, that there was even an outside chance that they would pay even more and they would try and bring him in January. At the player's end, they're quite coy on that because his focus is kind of on World Cup and a full season and then moving in the summer. So you hear mixed messages on this one. The majority of people are saying that the deal is pretty much done and will be for the summer. One or two are saying that perhaps there's a debate about whether they can get him any sooner. But one thing I'd just add that's very important is, regardless of how close the deal may be, what Nkunku has effectively pre-signed at Chelsea, and this is really important, is not legally binding or exclusive to Chelsea. And players can and do agree multiple deals with multiple clubs. So naturally, when others in the market hear that Chelsea are close to Nkunku, they could try and hijack. And until the clubs lock in an agreement and then Nkunku signs the contract, not any pre-agreement, legally speaking, he could talk to anyone he wants, and so could Leipzig. So that's why Chelsea still need to try and get this one over the line as quick as they possibly can, ideally before the World Cup. And they are progressing in that manner and very confident that that will be the case. So I think that we can look at this as in the home stretch, but once again, regardless of any progress, until it's done.
Yeah. That's about to say.
Will get a contract. Then he will sign that contract. And at any point, even last minute, until that happens, he can talk to anyone else that he wants as well.
That's the thing, and I think this is where Chelsea's fans have to be careful, because I see it on Twitter with certain Chelsea fans. It's like, oh, so it's a done deal then, Nkunku's a Chelsea player. Well, no, it's not a done deal, and that's the thing. He can be swayed, he can look elsewhere if another offer comes in or a potential good offer comes in as well. So I think I like the way we're moving, don't get me wrong. I just feel that, pre-agreement so early for a player to come in summer can also go against you. There's a lot of football to be played. Obviously, with there's World Cups, there's still half seasons to go as well. If a player picks up an injury in between them periods, it could not hinder the player, but if he picks up a serious, and it's a big if, don't get me wrong, but if he picked up a serious injury that put him out for, I don't know, a good 8 months, and you've signed a player early doors and you've paid a certain amount of money, because it's not a lot of money, you're not benefiting from it, and that's the only real risk from it. But at the same time, you leave it too long, and people come knocking on the door for him, and it makes it a lot harder to obviously to sway the player, especially if he's not fully sold on the idea of going to an individual club as well. So I think it's we'll have to see what happens with Nkunku. It'll be interesting to see. Some people in the chat keep asking about Leao. I know you mentioned Leao as well. Again, I'm not looking at January for Leao. We've played him twice already. He's had some good comments, said some good comments about Chelsea. He also mentioned Reece James being the hardest player that he's actually come up against so far in his career. Do you think Chelsea will entertain Leao? I mean, you look at what we still have at the moment with Pulisic and Havertz, and some people say, well, if you bring in Nkunku, who's going? Who's leaving? Like, who's he replacing in many ways? Is it a replacement by in many ways? And then you look at Leao and you bring someone like him in. These are two players for me that if Chelsea are interested in, they're going to have to be exiting certain players that carry come. We know Ziyech will probably leave, but he hasn't been playing anyway. But obviously, Callum Hudson-Odoi is out on loan in Bayer Leverkusen at the moment as well, and he's trying to he's having a good little run over there, and he'd probably look at the idea of potentially coming back. So in terms of Leao to Chelsea, is it a case of, well, they may entertain it, but are they going to just wait on what they currently have at the moment if they're obviously bringing in Nkunku as well?
Yeah, there'll be outgoings. That's the first thing to say. Yeah. So ultimately, the dynamic that Chelsea are looking for at the moment is a bit more depth, but is also a clear out. And it's still very possible that somebody like Hakim Ziyech, even a Christian Pulisic could go. We may, even though fans won't like to hear it, see Broja sent out on loan Chelsea don't want to sell him permanently. There's no suggestion, by the way, that will be imminent and in January, but you can obviously understand if more attack-minded players come in and Broja's game time is limited. That he might, because he now buys into the long-term future at Chelsea, he might be prepared to go on loan somewhere and get a little bit more game time. Then we don't know what the future of Aubameyang will be in the long term. We know the midfield needs a clear out. Zakaria could terminate his loan deal in January. Kante, Jorginho, players that could exit. I'm not saying every single one of these names will go, but there's lots of players in lots of positions, particularly from midfield and upwards, that could depart to create space for some of these players to come in. And then with Leao, I think that the Milan position, first of all, is that they want to offer him a new deal. And as I said before, signing a new deal on the right terms can still allow a club like Chelsea to proceed in the long run, because there may well be a release clause that's lower than the current one, as we've sort of seen with Nkunku, that then allows him to go in a window or two's time. Or there may be a gentleman's agreement. They could set the release clause crazy high to try and spark a bidding war, but there may still be an agreement. And that's why release clauses are not always to be believed. Because if you put a release clause at 150 odd million euros, let's say, then you might think, yikes. But that means that the club don't have to say yes to anybody, because that release clause is highly, highly unlikely to be met. But there may be a gentleman's agreement that says anything over 75 million, and we'll let you go. But then when the bids come in, the club can say, well, we're not going to give him 75 million, but 80 is all right. But then, we've got an offer for 85. And suddenly they can create a bidding war without being obligated to sell. So again, release clauses are tactical. They can price the player out the market, but there can also be agreements and clauses. You can have a release clause at 150, but if Milan don't win, let's say, the Scudetto or get to the semi-finals of the Champions League or something, it may alter. And that might only be an informal agreement, and therefore it's up to the club to keep their word. But there can be formal triggered clauses that give a player out. So what I understand with Leao is that he would be prepared to sign with Milan, but on the right terms, on terms that give him outs, which means even a new deal at Milan wouldn't necessarily affect Chelsea significantly. It might just delay the arrival. And then in terms of Chelsea's perspective, a little bit like Nkunku, there's a lot of people that really like Rafa Leao. And anyone that's watched him will know exactly why that is. And Graham Potter in particular is somebody that's come in and is equally as big a fan as Thomas Tuchel was. However, Chelsea have tried, and Chelsea have realized very quickly that Milan are tough to negotiate with. And in addition to that, which I think is another relatively important point to make, as we're also finding with Osimhen as well, both players are very happy playing in Serie A. They're very settled. They like the city that they live in. They like the lifestyle they've got, and they like the form that they're currently in. So it's not just about seeing a player that Chelsea like. It's again about persuading the player of the fit within the team. Because Rafa Leao at the moment and Nkunku are playing week in, week out, and they're on fire. And from Leao's perspective, he only scored 11, well, I say only, it was a good tally, but he scored 11 Serie A goals last season, which was his best season in Serie A. He's got 5 in 10 this season and 6 in 15 in all competitions. So you can understand why he might want to see the full season out and then think and assess his future. And again, if you look at it from a Portugal point of view, he's only won like 11 caps. So the last thing that he wants, having broken into the national team in 2021, is to move too early to Chelsea and find that he kind of gets buried in a rotational system, or played out of position or asked to change his position, and suddenly he's not the same player. So he has the advantage. He's only 23. He's got a lot of attributes. He can play as forward. He can play as winger. but he can pick and choose when he leaves. And that's another really important point. So on Chelsea's radar, not as advanced as Nkunku, very liked by Graham Potter, and one to watch really over the coming windows. But don't be surprised, don't be remotely surprised if Milan persuade him to sign improved terms, but also don't be remotely alarmed by that, because it won't make much difference from Chelsea's point of view, because I can promise you that if Leao did sign a new deal, regardless of how long it was, Milan don't really have the finances to match Chelsea, which means if they do match the finances in any new deal, that will actually be an indication that they accept he's going to go sooner rather than later. Because if they bump up his wages to, let's just say for the sake of it, 200,000 to 220,000 a week, that's not sustainable on Milan's current finances at the moment. They would be doing that regardless of what the contract says to keep him for a year, knowing that that would only be a short-term outlay before they cash in on him. So we'll have to wait and see what happens on this one, but still very much on Chelsea's radar.
Interesting stuff. We'll have to see how that pans out in terms of the forward line. I do think Nkunku is probably a better fit in terms of what he offers for the football club and what we require. I still think with Leao, though, he's a specific profile player that I think we do kind of miss. And it does sort of fall on Pulisic and more so Sterling, because I do feel that they are the dribblers in the team and that they should be doing it more consistently. I don't, however, feel they've been doing that. So, Leao, I feel, is just a dribbler. You give him the ball and he will run at his player to create, and I think sometimes in our team, that's something that we do need. We are going to finish off very shortly, but I know someone in the chat's also asked a question about the midfield. And one of the questions that popped up was asking about, CFC Jack said that Simon Phillips said that Ben Jacobs was going to do a thread on Rice. On any news on this? I don't know how true that is, Ben. And as you're here, I thought I'd ask the question. Is that something that we're looking to do very soon? And also on that, Rice, obviously we spoke in the past about the potentials of him in Chelsea and whatever, but also Jude Bellingham. Do you think there's an option for him to potentially come to England? And if so, would Chelsea look at both? And then also there's Alvarez, isn't there, as well? I mean, who wants to leave Ajax. So it's like, what do you feel in terms of what Chelsea are going to do with the midfield?
Yeah, I'll come on to all those three. The thread on Rice is coming, fear not. As ever, I like to take my time and go to all sources before certainly doing long threads. And the Rice thread is a work in progress. But if we start with him, what's very clear is Chelsea have had a long-standing interest in Declan Rice, and Declan Rice is seriously interested in a move to Chelsea as well, and wants to stay in London, from what I gather, which obviously means there's only a set few clubs that would be his priority. It's very similar in that respect to when people say that N'Golo Kante would prefer to stay in London as well. It just gives clubs an advantage that are local to where the players currently are. And that can be the difference if you have a series of suitors, as you would expect around a player like Declan Rice, that ability to stay settled in London and move to a club like Chelsea could be one factor in a very tight decision. And I've said this many times. Haaland did it at Manchester City. Bellingham, from what I understand, will do it as well. Players are more methodical now when they get a series of moves and each of them have got pros and cons. They often create a kind of scoring system. And this is what Haaland did. He was quite dispassionate about it. I think everyone thinks it was Man City because of his dad, because of the money. These are, of course, all factors. But he also wrote out all the clubs and kind of scored them. And Manchester City was also top of the score for facilities, manager, teammates, city, house, car, whatever. You can come up with the different things. And this is what the modern elite footballer does now because they're so in demand. So Rice is very possible. I've been misquoted on this one, and I don't know why. I think it's because I just replied on Twitter and the thread got confused. But very possible means summer. It does not mean January, from what I understand it. West Ham view Declan Rice as untouchable in January specifically. And I think that if West Ham, even though they've picked up a little bit now and the table's quite tight, I think if West Ham don't get European football come the end of the season, from what I understand it, and I will shape a thread around this over the coming days or weeks, West Ham have an agreement in place with Rice that they would allow him to leave for the right price, and that price would not be the insane quoted price of last summer. So West Ham doing badly is actually a good indication for Chelsea, because it will sort of force West Ham's hand a little bit more. Whereas if West Ham end up in the top 6, then they won't owe Rice anything, and he either becomes more expensive or a harder player to get from Chelsea's perspective. But, a long-standing target on Chelsea's radar that hasn't really changed with the new ownership, and one to watch next summer. And from what I'm told, Chelsea don't believe they're going to have to pay this 100, 110, 120 million. They think that with a preferable structure, as we saw with Wesley Fofana, and potentially in a year's time, he will be a player that they can get a little bit cheaper. So very much a name that the new structure will look at and work on. And this is normal again, because to get a player like Rice, you've got to be working 1, 2, 3 windows ahead. And that doesn't mean it's going to come off, and it doesn't mean that it's going to be your top priority. It just means that if you want to be in the conversation, you have to put the legwork in. So it's no surprise that links with Chelsea and Rice will pick up. But they're going to have to be in it, from what I understand anyway, for the long game. With Bellingham, Liverpool and Real Madrid are front runners. Manchester City may enter the fray. Erling Haaland has already told Bellingham to come and join him at Manchester City. But hey, any player that knows Bellingham, that's friendly with Bellingham at any club, can say exactly the same thing. So just because Haaland said that, it doesn't mean it's going to necessarily carry any weight. But Liverpool and Real are the ones that have put in the legwork. With Bellingham, again, it's a next summer thing. It's not a January thing. And with Chelsea, obviously, like everyone else in world football, they like Jude Bellingham, but they're going to have to assess a strategy. They're going to have to assess evaluation, and they're going to have to work out how they can get him ahead of their rivals. And everyone's also going to have to keep an eye on what Dortmund do, because they're not ruling out putting improved terms on the table, which again could affect the price. That's another subplot to look at. I think the final thing to say is, like, everyone talks about Leao, then everyone talks about Rice, then everybody talks about Bellingham. And Chelsea could easily, as you would expect, do due diligence and scout and legwork to look into all of these, because this is completely normal. It's recruitment, let's not forget. And if you've got a job, any job in any industry, what do? You put an advert out there, a football club scouts and puts feelers out there. Then you list 8 to 10 candidates, then you interview 6 of them. So that doesn't mean you're going to employ all 6 of them, but it's a process to get to 1 or 2 in each position. So you would fully expect Chelsea to be in the mix for all of these, but they're not going to be able to find 80 to 100 million on each player in the space of the next 2 windows, in addition to probably making defensive reinforcements. Even without goings, that would still be an outlay for Chelsea. Even if Ziyech left, Pulisic left, Kante left, Jorginho left, the fees for those 4, and it's a big if all 4 go within the next 2 windows, they're going to be nowhere near a fee potentially to bring in a Declan Rice, a Jude Bellingham, a Josko Gvardiol, let's say, and a Rafa Leao, just plucking 4 out there that are roughly speaking, or let's just call them an average of 75 million just for the hell of it. That is a massive outlay for Chelsea.
Yeah.
That's the fact they still may need defenders. So just be aware of that it's very easy to play Championship Manager here, which ironically is accused of it. Bowley is not doing, and sort of say, well, Rice can fit in as DM and Bellingham can be more attack-minded, and then Leao can play out wider as a forward and Gvardiol's a defender. So we'll take those 4 and think, great. But you got to look at the cumulative finances and do the maths and work out what's feasible and sustainable. So Bellingham, Chelsea are behind their rivals because of the sanctions, because of the uncertainty at the football club. They got some catch-up to do there, despite the ambition. Rice, under Marina, quite a lot of legwork was done, and the player is certainly keen. So it's about exploiting the West Ham situation and hopefully convincing Rice to join, and then with a good structure, getting him at better value than he was come last summer. And then with Edson Alvarez, he's maybe the shorter term one that Chelsea are looking at. Midfield, make no mistake, is going to be the priority in January, especially if Zakaria terminates his loan deal. They're going to need somebody in that position. And Edson Alvarez was the top choice towards the end of the window. And Bowley has very much told Alvarez and his people that Chelsea hope and plan to come back. So that's perhaps one to watch in the shorter term to see whether Chelsea keep their word and make a move in January.
It's going to be interesting because I think a lot of Chelsea fans would all agree that the one area that we lack a lot of depth in is the midfield. With Kante not obviously being available, Kovacic obviously, apparently playing with a knee injury at the moment and still playing, quite well. Jorginho is consistent, but there's just there's limits to the way that Jorginho can be used, I feel, and some Chelsea fans feel in terms of the squad. And we do miss an out and out sort of DM in a Rice sort of a character, an Alvarez sort of character. More Rice for me, just purely because of the progression element and how quick he moves the ball and how progressive he is, the way he plays the game. And I highlight the Liverpool game on how well he played, I thought, in terms of breaking the play and trying to get the ball moved forward quickly. And I look at what we're trying to do at Chelsea, and I just think that they're the specific profile of players that I think enhance this squad. And I think that Bowley, like you said, and I agree with you, it's going to be a thing of, well, they're going to probably prioritise the areas that maybe Potter feels that they need to sort now, rather than run around getting Leao and Nkunku and Gvardiol and all of them and Bellingham all at once just for the sake of it. And it kind of defeats the object of the recruitment policy of what we're trying to do as well, and the people that they've appointed, right? Because these guys, from what I understand, that are coming in are going to be looking for sort of the next big things rather than going for the finished articles or the biggest names in Europe at the moment that are firing in their leagues, for example. So yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see how Chelsea move forward. And again, I don't expect much to be done in January. I do feel, however, that a wing back should be something that we look at, especially with Reece James and the issues we have there. We don't really have strength in depth like we do with Cucurella and Chua on the other side. So, I haven't heard of any wing backs options maybe that Chelsea are looking at the moment, maybe potentially in January. Maybe we have to wait out for that. I'm not sure if you've heard anything in terms of wing backs at Chelsea.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the World Cup kind of benefits on the James front in the sense that they don't need to, if it was only to cover Reece James, right, then there's no real need in the sense that he's either fit for the World Cup and then fit for Chelsea the very back end of the World Cup, or he doesn't go to the World Cup, it's an 8-week recovery, and then by the time he gets to next year, Reece James is back. So from a Chelsea perspective, he only really misses 3 odd games, and the last game in the Champions League isn't as important now because of the qualification and the winning the group already being there. So it's good news in that respect. In terms of wing backs or full backs or whatever you want to call them, there's a few things to say, really. One is that Denzel Dumfries hasn't gone off the radar entirely from the perspective of Chelsea. So that's a player that Graham Potter really likes. And I think that Chelsea tried for Dumfries a few times, really, particularly when Thomas Tuchel was still at the club, and Inter's price was kind of quite high. But they may well soften on that in January or even next summer. So keep an eye on that one. The other thing that I want to put out there, and he's been forgotten about, really, is Tino Livramento. And the reason that he's been forgotten about is just purely because of the injury. He's on his way back now, a fantastic talent who was given a fair amount of game time at Southampton. I still think only 19, and Chelsea do have the option of a buyback for something in the region of 25 million. Now, not a player in the context of covering for James, not a player in the context of short term, but in the long term, over the next few windows, if his form and development continues, keep an eye out on that one, because that would be an example of Chelsea bringing youth back. And for me, I just think he's a very, very good player that offers a lot at both ends of the field. So one to watch. And I know that Livramento felt that his career before the injury was really in a perfect place. And a lot of clubs were circling and looking. So there's nothing really to suggest that Chelsea are intent on trying to get him back at any point at this stage. But again, one interesting aspect in all of this is obviously Joe Shields, Southampton, hadn't really been there long enough and Livramento was injured. But that's another piece to the puzzle there as well. So keep an eye out on him. If we're just talking about general fullbacks rather than specifically only right-sided ones, then there was nothing that significant in the Kyle Walker-Peters links from what I was told. So I don't see...
a long-term injury, didn't he, as well, to be fair, from what we understand? He's picked up a big injury, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has. Unfortunately, everyone seems to be picking up injuries at the moment.
Mad, it is mad.
But yeah, there's a few that they'll look at in that position. I come back to what I said before, that I don't think this will be a reaction to Reece James's injury. I think this will be a spillover to the fact that Chelsea did not make enough defensive reinforcements as they would have liked. So everyone rightly celebrates Fofana, who unfortunately now is injured, and everyone's quite pleased with Koulibaly, even if it was a lot of money to pay for a 30-year-old. But let's not forget that if Thomas Tuchel had his way, regardless of the names that came in, he wanted one more centre-back. And probably, especially because for large parts of that transfer window, there was still that feeling that Azpilicueta might go. He wanted somebody in the Azpilicueta position as well. So now we might find more of a hybrid player, a versatile player that's comfortable as a right-sided centre-back or potentially a right-back, or they might go down the line of kind of like an out-and-out right-back / full-back. But that's definitely an area where they'll look to strengthen for sure. And I think that's the point really with January, that Chelsea, I don't see Chelsea signing, in terms of elite players for the now, I don't see Chelsea bringing in more than 3. I think one of them will undoubtedly be a midfielder, probably a old school central midfielder or a DM. I think one of them will be a defender. And then I think that the third one will be based upon outgoings. So, you know, if a Ziyech, a Pulisic, a Zakaria, etc. went in January, then that's when they may need 2 midfielders, or that's when they may move faster on a more creative-minded player because there's space in the squad. But I think that there's so much excitement and spillover from the targets that they had during the summer that everyone kind of expects Todd Boehly to slap down another 300 odd million in January. And I think that their summer planning and they're cherry picking around essentials and opportunism in January, but certainly not to the same volume as we saw last summer.
And what a way to end the show as well. Great show, to be honest. It's an hour and a half long as well. We've really delved into not only the recruitment policy, but also the potentials of signings that we may see in January, maybe seeing in summer as well. It's more of an overall talk on Chelsea today, and Ben's given us some really good insight into that as well today. And like I said, guys, please make sure that you are smashing them like buttons. Just get these likes up as well. Subscribe to GNA TV and Chelsea Fan TV as well. You can find Ben Jacobs, literally it's in his tag name, his Avi name on Twitter at JacobsBen on there. So make sure you follow him as well. And any sort of final thoughts, Ben, that you want to share?
I just think it's exciting times for Chelsea. Obviously on the field, what's very interesting if you look at the dynamic is how important the next few games are. Luckily, the table's tight enough, so I don't think there's any kind of cause for panic if Chelsea enter into the World Cup outside of the top 4. But it's just interesting how the fixtures fall now. I'm kind of looking at Brighton away and a kind of Potter homecoming. And then obviously Zagreb doesn't mean a great deal anymore. But it's still a chance to presumably see 1 or 2 of the bit part players. But then, just really, really key run-in the sense that you've got Arsenal who are flying, you've got Man City away. Okay, it's in the EFL Cup, but it's still a chance to get a statement win away from home and bring a trophy in the new ownership's first season. So let's see how seriously they take that. I would imagine it will be full rotation, but Man City will probably do the same. So good opportunity there to get a statement win from some of the bit part players. And then perhaps most intriguingly for me, going away at St. James's Park, and Newcastle are flying. And, if Chelsea can see off Newcastle based on the table at the moment, there's a fair chance that they will enter into the World Cup break in the top 4. But similarly, if they don't pick up or if they lose to Arsenal and then they lose to Newcastle, and obviously I'm taking that to an extreme that I don't personally think will happen, but suddenly you get in a position where you could be 4 or 5 points off the top 4 and you're lingering on that heading into January. So I'm really intrigued because this run against a team he knows really well, and then against Arsenal and Newcastle with Man City in the Cup is the real litmus test. He's passed the first, if you like, honeymoon test. And now it's the real litmus test. And how would Chelsea respond to a loss against a big team? How would Chelsea respond if they get a series of wobbles? And really, they've had a few where Palace, Brentford, where they've not been that clinical. Even in the Champions League the other night, they missed a ton of chances. So that's quite exciting for me because it means that they've got gears to go up. But it can also be quite worrying because when you come up against the big game, you can't afford to miss as many chances as they did against Salzburg. So, everything's a bit calmer at the club. Everything's really ambitious at the club. There's way more of a plan at Chelsea Football Club on and off the field than certain parts of the media or other fan bases are painting it. Bowley's being wrongly caricatured and derided as having no football knowledge somehow, when actually, he's been at the club 4 months and he's building an ambitious model from scratch and he's trying to get the best in the business. So, of course, there's a period of transition, but make no mistake, this is a seriously ambitious, experienced businessman that is in it for the long term. And if I was a Chelsea fan, I wouldn't mind about the uncertainty and how fast they're moving at this point. Because think about it, when people first learned that Bowley was partnering with Clearlake, and the amount of messages that I got saying, it's an investment firm, private investment firm, like we're doomed, we're screwed, like pick instead. Like, yikes. And the first thing I said, you may remember, I said 2 things. I said, 1, don't be surprised if Todd Bowley was chairman. He's chairman. 2, Gvardiol will be heavily involved on the football side. And I remember a lot of people went, huh? Like, really? Like, how do you know that? Like, they're not going to do that. Like, they haven't even won yet. And I was like, the reason I knew that was because everyone connected to that bid and around that bid and around the football club said the same thing, that they were highly, highly impressed by the structure and by the plan in place. And now, as that plan is becoming apparent, sure, it appears a bit chaotic. It appears like they're moving fast. And those that love Tuchel will obviously feel a bit hard done by his departure. And those that love Marina and Buck will feel that the core of the club that won 21 trophies in that era are gone. But for Chelsea to win another 21 trophies, change was needed. I don't think anyone would have liked it in the manner that it happened because it was so uncertain to the very future of the club. But how refreshing is it to have owners that are visible, that speak, that interact, that are trying to learn about the club? Like, yep, they've got their own ideas. And to be perfectly honest with you, when they paid what they paid, they're fully entitled to put their stamp on the football club and be involved because they are the owners of the football club. But I think you'll see over the next year, the next 2 windows in the next year, regardless of what happens this season, Chelsea go from a club to a model. And by becoming a model, they become a powerhouse. And by becoming a powerhouse, they become connected at all levels. And by becoming connected at all levels, they succeed at all levels. And by succeeding at all levels, they become sustainable at all levels. And then that in turn bleeds back to the success of your elite men and women's teams. And if everything goes according to plan, it comes with trophies, and not just trophies, but a dominance for a long period of time. Fans are going to have to be patient with that. The model, the success, it's not going to be born overnight. Chelsea are still going to be adrift, I believe, of Manchester City in the next season, at least. But what they are trying to do is catch up. And sometimes football fans, and I know I'm kind of going on a rant here, sometimes football fans have to be humble to accept that as much as they love their football club, and as much as they love their players, and as much as they think their team can beat any other team on the day. And why wouldn't a Chelsea fan win this? Because they won the Champions League with Thomas Tuchel. They've won Premier Leagues. They finished in the top 4 almost automatically. But sometimes you have to accept that regardless of your best 11, regardless of you on your day, there are better teams in terms of the long term, the model, the consistency, that are in a like for like, more attractive to elite players, more stable. And if you accept that, and how can you not accept that at Chelsea when 4 months ago we were talking about whether they'd even have a license? So regardless of if you do a combined Chelsea-Man City 11 and you put more Chelsea players in than Man City players, and I get that, look at the club. I'm not talking about players. I'm talking about the whole club, every aspect. Chelsea are not where Man City is.
No.
And they're not really where Liverpool are, but in a year, they might be above Liverpool because of the ambition being shown. And I think that sometimes if you accept what an owner's trying to do behind the scenes, it is risk reward at times. But if you accept what they're trying to do to the infrastructure and you're patient that it will benefit the football team, then one day soon, you won't have to have this debate of, are we better than Man City? Are we better than Liverpool? You'll be able to just prove it because you've got a more modern stadium. You've got a bigger squad. You beat them to the next Sterling Haaland. You've got better fan engagement. You've got better inclusion. You've got better finances and sustainability. You've got a better network. So again, if you score it dispassionately right now, Chelsea are behind their rivals. But if you score it in, let's just say, 2 seasons, the stadium will be up there, the infrastructure will be up there, the model will be up there, the network will be up there. And that means there's no excuses not to succeed, which ironically can put more pressure on a manager, because if they give the manager at men and women's level all of that control and resource and infrastructure and investment in the short term, that's when in the long term, they then become clear lake capital and they think about what's our return. And that, in a weird way, it can put more pressure on a manager like Graham Potter in 5 seasons than it can right now. So that's just something to kind of keep across and watch. But I think the future's really bright for Chelsea. And as I say, my final thought is just, it's a very intriguing run of fixtures in the short term. And let's see how they fare heading to that final game before the break against Newcastle.
I agree. Lots of football to still be played before the World Cup. And you said it well. We could be 4 or 5 points off the Champions League. We could actually be a lot closer to the top than anyone really expected. Who knows? You know, it's going to be interesting to see. But I do agree with what you said in terms of the whole model and the idea and the philosophy and I think as a fan of Chelsea, we should be excited with what's going on at the moment. But I also feel it's the unknown. You've got a manager that's you don't know what to expect because he has no real CV when you look at him. You know, you have owners that don't have any CV in the industry in this specific sporting industry in itself. And as a fan itself, we're just waiting to see the route that we take. And you know, we got to trust it. We got to trust it. And I do feel that their intentions are pure, and I do feel that they are going to try and keep Chelsea at the top, or at least take Chelsea back up to the top of the pile. But along with that, also have the dominance, you know. And in past under Roman Abramovich era, it was very like, yeah, we won and we won a lot of trophies. Don't get me wrong, but in the Premier League, we were never consistent in terms of dominance, you know, in winning it back. So we won it back to back. But it's like you said, it's the longevity of being consistent, and that does come with the board and the project and the philosophy and things like that. So I am looking forward to seeing how things go with Chelsea. I want to thank you, Ben. Thank you again for coming onto the show. Over 600 people here today. It's been a really good show today. I've enjoyed the insight as well, and I'm sure we'll have you back again very, very soon if you're up for it as well.
Yeah, look forward to it. Always a pleasure coming on and talking about Chelsea, and good luck at the weekend.
Thank you. And good luck to Leicester, mate. I don't know where you are at the moment in the league, but you still dithering around the bottom, or
Well, we won at Wolves 4-0. I think we had 4 shots on target and we scored 4 goals, and they had 21 shots on goal and didn't score one. So that was a good win for us. I think that we needed to beat Wolves and Leeds, and we got 6 points out of 6. So things are looking a little bit better for Leicester. We're out of the relegation zone. Forest look a mess. Wolves look a mess. Leeds look a mess. So I'm hopeful that Leicester can get a bit of breathing space between the bottom 3.
We will see. And guys, make sure before you leave, you hit them like, subscribe to the channel as well, and leave a comment below. Leave a comment below on the discussions that we've had. Give us your thoughts and opinions as well. And yeah, take care of yourselves, and we'll try and get back for the match preview for Brighton, hopefully tomorrow as well. Take care, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll be back again very, very soon.